I didn't think much about the garage at first. That was before I realized someone else was using it. It was one of those spaces you use without really looking at. A place for boxes, old paint cans, tools I barely touched. I parked the car, shut the door, and forgot about it. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not strong, not obvious, just stale, like damp cardboard and old air. I assumed it was the weather or something leaking from a box I'd forgotten about. I opened the side door to air it out and went on with my day. A few nights later, I heard a noise. It wasn't loud, just a soft scrape, like something shifting against concrete. I paused, listening from inside the house, but it didn't happen again. Garages make noise. Houses settle. I didn't think about it after that. The second sign was smaller. One of the shelves had been moved. Not dramatically, just a few inches to the left. Enough that the shadow it cast on the wall looked different when I turned on the light. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I told myself I must have bumped it when I was getting something earlier. I didn't remember doing that, but I also didn't remember every small thing I did. That explanation worked. For a while. A week later, I noticed the door. The garage has an interior door that leads into the house. I always lock it. Not out of fear, just habit. That night, it was unlocked. I stood there with my hand on the knob, feeling foolish for the spike of adrenaline that ran through me. I locked it again, double-checked it, and went to bed. The next morning, it was unlocked. That's when I started paying attention. I went into the garage during the day and actually looked around. Really looked. Nothing obvious was out of place. No footprints, no broken locks, no open containers. But the smell was worse. I noticed a pile of flattened boxes I didn't remember stacking. They were arranged neatly in the corner, almost like insulation. I bent down and touched them. They were warm. I pulled my hand back and stood up too fast, my head spinning for a second. Garages get warm. Heat rises. It was probably nothing. I kept telling myself that. The next sound came late at night. A cough, short, controlled, like someone trying not to make noise. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. It came again, definitely human. I didn't move. I didn't turn on a light. I just lay there, listening to the house settle around me. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I told myself it was a dream. That belief lasted until I went into the garage and found the trash. Not household trash. No food wrappers from the kitchen. No packaging I recognized. This was different. Empty cans, generic labels. A torn piece of cardboard with something scribbled on it in black marker. I couldn't make out the words, but the handwriting was messy and uneven, like it had been written in the dark. My hands were shaking when I dropped it into a bag. I called a friend and told them what I'd found. They laughed gently, asked if I'd been watching too many videos. I laughed too. I wanted to. That night, I put a chair under the interior door handle. Not as a barricade, just something that would fall if the door opened. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. The scrape of metal on concrete. The chair shifted. I heard breathing on the other side of the door. Slow, careful, close. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen, listening, but eventually the sound faded. The chair didn't fall. In the morning, the chair was back in its original position, perfectly upright. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick and stayed home, sitting in the living room with the garage door in view. I told myself that if someone was really there, I'd catch them leaving. Hours passed. Nothing. Around dusk, I finally worked up the nerve to open the garage door again. I didn't step inside at first. I just stood in the doorway, scanning every corner. That's when I saw the sleeping area. It was tucked behind the shelves, just out of sight unless you knew where to look. Flattened cardboard, an old blanket I didn't recognize, a pillow made from folded clothing. Someone had arranged it carefully, deliberately. I backed out of the garage and shut the door. I called the police. They arrived faster than I expected. 2 officers, calm, professional. They searched the garage while I stood in the driveway, my heart pounding. When they came back out, they told me no one was there. They said it looked like someone had been there at some point. Probably a transient. Maybe they'd moved on. They asked if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. Before they left, one of the officers paused. He asked how long I thought the person had been staying there. I told him I wasn't sure. He nodded, then said, "Looks like they were pretty comfortable." After they left, I locked everything. Doors, windows, garage. I added extra locks. That night, I slept with the lights on. Nothing happened. The next day, I cleaned the garage out completely. I threw away the cardboard, washed the floor, removed anything that could be used as bedding. The smell lingered for days. A week later, I found the note. It was taped to the inside of the garage door, right at eye level. Just one sentence. I tried not to wake you. I moved out 2 days later. The house is still there. The garage still looks normal from the outside, but sometimes, when I drive past it, I think about how quiet it was while I lived there. How easy it was for someone to stay without being noticed, and how careful they must have been to live that close to me without ever letting me see them. I never saw anyone in the garage, but I kept finding proof that someone was. That's what made it harder to explain. After the first few odd things, I started paying attention. Not in a paranoid way, just noticing details I used to ignore. The kind of noticing you do when something feels slightly off, but you don't yet have a reason to panic. It started with the light. The overhead bulb in the garage was on when I got home from work one afternoon. I clearly remembered turning it off that morning. I always did. The switch was right by the door. Muscle memory. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the light like it might tell me what happened. I turned it off and went inside. The next morning, it was on again. I checked the switch this time. It wasn't loose. No wiring issue, no flicker, just on. I replaced the bulb. It didn't change anything. A few days later, I noticed the door tracks. The garage door slid up and down on metal rails, and over time they collected dust and grime. I'd never cleaned them. I didn't need to. But now there were clean lines. Thin streaks where something had been brushed away. Not enough to scream footprints, but enough that the pattern looked interrupted. I ran my finger along the track. Clean, then dirty again. Like someone had been careful. I told myself it could have been temperature changes, expansion, contraction. I didn't believe that explanation, but it kept me calm enough to function. The trash can was next. I kept one in the corner of the garage for random junk. Broken tools, old rags, stuff I didn't want in the house. One morning, it was lighter. Not empty, just less. I pulled the bag out and looked through it. Things were missing. Small things. Paper towels. Empty containers. A pair of gloves I barely remembered throwing away. Things no one would steal. Unless they needed them. I stood there holding the bag, listening to the quiet. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing made a sound. That's what scared me most. I put a camera in the garage after that. Nothing fancy, just a cheap motion camera with a wide lens. I aimed it at the center of the space and told myself this would settle everything. Either I'd catch something, or I'd finally relax. The first night, the camera recorded 3 events, all marked motion detected. I watched them the next morning. Each clip was 10 seconds long. Each one showed the same thing: an empty garage. No movement, no shadows, no flicker. Just the light switching on halfway through the frame, then switching off again. I checked the timestamps. They were spaced out evenly, about an hour apart. I adjusted the sensitivity, changed the angle, replaced the batteries. The next night, the camera recorded 5 events. Same thing: empty garage, light on, light off. I watched the footage frame by frame. Nothing entered the shot. Nothing crossed the sensor. No shape passed in front of the lens. The camera just decided something had happened. The smell came back after that. Not strong, just warm, lived in. I noticed it when I opened the garage door in the evenings, like air that had been trapped for a while and slowly released. I started leaving the door open during the day. It didn't help. One afternoon, I found a cup. It was sitting on the workbench near the back wall. Not mine, plain, plastic, slightly warped from heat. There was a faint ring at the bottom, like it had been set down while still wet. I picked it up and turned it over. Nothing written on it, no brand, no markings. I threw it away immediately. That night, the camera recorded motion again. When I checked the footage, the cup was back. Same spot, same angle. I unplugged the camera. I didn't tell anyone about the cup. I didn't want to hear someone laugh and tell me I was overthinking things. Instead, I cleaned the garage. I swept. I reorganized. I removed anything loose or usable. I wanted the space to feel empty again. For a while, it worked. Then I found the chair. I didn't keep a chair in the garage, but there it was. A folding chair set up near the back wall, facing the interior door. Not touching it, just angled toward it. Like someone had been sitting there, watching. I stood in the doorway and waited. Nothing happened. I checked the camera logs. No recorded motion, no clips, nothing. The next day, the chair was gone. In its place was a small indentation on the concrete floor. A shallow, oval depression, like something heavy had rested there for a long time. I pressed my foot into it. It fit. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, lights on, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps, no breathing, no doors. Just the faint click of the garage light turning on, then off. On, off. I never saw anyone. I never confronted anyone, but every sign pointed to the same conclusion. Something was using the space, not hiding, not sneaking, just existing. Carefully enough that I could doubt myself. I moved out a month later. The new owners never complained. No reports, no police calls, no strange smells. Sometimes I wonder if that's because whatever was there left, or because it learned how to be even quieter. I didn't realize the garage was being used by someone else until I noticed our routines never overlapped. By the time I noticed something was wrong, that idea didn't even make sense anymore. The garage was too clean. After the earlier problems, I'd stopped leaving things out. No loose boxes, no trash, no clutter, just the car, the shelves, and a narrow walking path to the interior door. Everything had a place. That's why the first change stood out. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than usual, not dramatically. Just enough that when I got in, my legs stretched straight instead of bending the way they normally did. I adjusted the seat and told myself I must have moved it earlier without thinking. That explanation lasted until it happened again. This time, the mirrors were off. Not angled wildly, just slightly wrong. Like someone taller had been driving and tried to fix them back afterward, but didn't quite get it right. I checked the car for signs of a break-in. Nothing. Doors locked. No damage. No missing items. I started locking the car inside the garage. It didn't change anything. The next sign came from the radio. I don't listen to talk radio. Never have. But one morning, when I started the car, a low voice filled the space, mid-sentence, calm and conversational. I turned it off immediately. When I turned it back on, my usual station was there, preset, untouched. I sat there longer than I needed to, hands on the steering wheel, feeling a quiet pressure behind my eyes. I began keeping track after that. Not obsessively, just mentally noting details. What time I left, what time I came back, what was where. The patterns didn't overlap, and that's what scared me. Things were never wrong while I was there. The changes happened in clean blocks of time. Seat adjusted. Mirrors changed. Radio station switched. Then corrected again. Like someone else was being considerate. One evening, I got home earlier than usual. The garage door was already open. I froze in the driveway, staring at the dark rectangle of space where the door should have been closed. Nothing moved. I slowly pulled in and shut the engine off. The interior door was unlocked. I knew that because I always locked it when I left. I didn't go inside right away. I stood there, listening to the hum of the overhead light. No breathing, no footsteps, no sound at all. I locked the door and went into the house. That night, I checked my phone before bed. I had a notification from my car's app. Vehicle unlocked. Time stamped 20 minutes before I got home. I hadn't been anywhere near it. I stopped using the garage for a few days after that. Parked on the street, entered through the front door. Avoided the space entirely. Nothing happened. No changes, no signs. When I finally went back in, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Almost. There was a water bottle in the cup holder of the car, not mine. Half empty. The plastic was warm. I didn't touch it. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to understand how something could be that recent without me noticing. I threw the bottle away and cleaned the car. That night, I stayed up late on purpose. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the clock. Midnight passed. Nothing happened. 1 o'clock, still nothing. At 1:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Another notification from the car app. Vehicle locked. I was sitting on the couch. I hadn't moved. I didn't go to the garage. I didn't check the cameras. I just sat there staring at the dark hallway, listening to the house remain perfectly quiet. The next morning, the seat was pushed back again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It was all the way back. The mirrors were adjusted high. The radio was tuned to a station I'd never listened to before, and the interior door was locked from the inside. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell anyone. Because by then, I understood something that made it worse. Whoever it was wasn't sneaking around. They weren't hiding. They were using the space on a schedule. Just not mine. We were never there at the same time, and that felt intentional. I moved out a week later. The new place doesn't have a garage. I don't miss it. But sometimes, when I get into my car and the seat feels wrong, I wonder if I was ever really the only one using it, or if I was just lucky enough to never arrive early. I thought moving away would end everything, but it only made it easier for something to follow me. That was the whole point. After everything that happened, I made sure of it. I cleared it out completely. No boxes, no shelves, no trash, Nothing that could be used, leaned against, or mistaken for a place to stay. Bare concrete, bare walls. When I locked the door for the last time, it felt final. I moved across town, different house, different layout. No shared walls, no garage attached to the living space. I told myself I'd be able to relax again. For a while, I did. The first few weeks were quiet. Normal. I slept through the night. I stopped checking doors twice. The constant tension drained out of me so slowly I didn't notice it leaving. Then the mail started coming. Not forwarding mistakes, not old bills, packages. They were addressed to me. Correct name, correct spelling. The return address was blank. The first box was small, lightweight. Inside was a garage door remote. Not the new house's, the old one. I stared at it for a long time before throwing it away. I didn't tell anyone. A few days later, I got another package. This one had no box, just a padded envelope. Inside was a folded piece of cardboard. Flattened, creased, warm. I dropped it on the kitchen counter like it had burned me. That night, I checked the locks twice. Nothing happened. The next package came a week later. This time, it was heavier. A key, not labeled, not tagged, just a single metal key wrapped in tissue paper. I recognized it immediately. The interior door, the one between the garage and the house. I sat down on the floor and stared at it until my legs went numb. I didn't know how to explain what was happening without sounding unhinged, so I didn't try. I changed my number, updated my address with everyone I could think of. I stopped opening the packages. They kept coming anyway, sometimes boxes, sometimes envelopes, sometimes nothing but a note taped to the door. Short messages, written neatly, still fits, still quiet, you left it clean. I called the police after the fourth note. They were polite, concerned, thorough. They checked the house, asked about enemies, break-ins, old disputes. I showed them the packages. They told me there were no fingerprints, no usable prints anyway. One officer asked if I was sure the items were from the old place. I told him yes. He asked how I could be sure. I didn't answer. That night I dreamed about the garage, not the new house, the old one. Empty, clean, echoing. I woke up to a notification on my phone. Motion detected. I didn't have a garage camera anymore. I sat up, heart racing, and opened the app. The footage loaded slowly, grainy, dim, concrete floor. Bare walls, the old garage. Someone had turned the camera back on. The timestamp was current. The feed showed nothing for a few seconds. Then the light turned on. A shadow moved just out of frame. Something brushed against the wall. Then a voice spoke. Not loud, not rushed, just calm. You always leave it the same way, it said. I deleted the app. I shut the phone off. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, there was one final package waiting. No box, no envelope. Just a single sheet of paper folded in half. Inside was a sentence written carefully in black ink. I'll keep it ready. I moved again after that. Different city, different state. No garage, no storage unit, no spare space. I don't keep anything I'm not willing to throw away. Sometimes, when I wake up at night, I listen for sounds I shouldn't hear. Not footsteps, not breathing, just the absence of noise. The kind that tells you a space is being used. Exactly the way it was meant to be, even when you're not there anymore.